This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Kia ora, you are listening to Left From Nowhere on Otago Access Radio 105.4 FM 1575 AM. I am your host, Tyler West. I also happen to be a member of the Otago Socialist Society, which is the sponsor of this show. Today we will be discussing the ongoing catastrophe in Palestine, and I don't use catastrophe to say that it is a neutral thing by any means, as we will get into, but I think the word is appropriate for the conditions on the ground. I am joined by Rinad Tamimi, who I'll introduce in a second. We are planning on going over the events happening on the ground in both Gaza and the West Bank, and if we have some time for it, also a little bit about the widening regional conflict that is occurring pretty much as we speak. It hasn't expanded to any new countries per se, but the level of intervention has certainly increased from where it was the last time we had Rinad on. And we will also have a little bit of an update on what you can do if you are based here in Dunedin, and an event or two coming up as well. So with that, I'd like to thank Rinad for coming on. I hope your day's been okay.
Thank you. Kia ora and salam, everyone. I am happy to be here, but also the reason why I'm here doesn't make me happy. But I think the least we can do these days is to raise awareness about what's going on and at least to speak up for what's going on. But thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I thought anyone who may not be familiar with Rinad can go back and listen to the episode from February, which I believe is episode 9, and we talk a little bit about Rinad's past, but I think today we're going to reserve as much time as we can to have a very thorough discussion about what's happening on the ground. But suffice to say, Rinad is a Palestinian Kiwi and is I would say, a key person in the local Palestine solidarity movement. So I think we can just pretty much get into it. I'm sure pretty much anyone listening will have seen probably a lot more than they ever wanted to see in their life, being more or less live streamed. But how about we have just a short update on the general contours of what's happening beyond what you might say is generalized misery. Something a bit more specific than that.
Yeah, definitely. Unfortunately, as you just mentioned, I think we've all been witnessing more than we should be at this point in time, but we are witnessing it and at least we're not living in it. And unfortunately, my brothers and sisters in Palestine are going through it day by day. I think the latest update of this, I would still call it a genocide, is the starvation at the moment. It's basically Israel is trying to kill Palestinians by starving them, not just by killing them with guns and with bombs, but by starving them simply and not letting any aid get in. I'll be giving a few short updates about things in general. So 650,000 children under the age of 5 are on the brink of death due to starvation. And at least 620 Palestinians have already died due to malnutrition, including at least 76 children. Dr. Sohaib Al-Homs, director of the field hospital in the Mawasi humanitarian zone, has warned of an impending wave of deaths due to hunger-induced organ failure among displaced adults and children. And unfortunately, lately, what we've been seeing a lot of is the starving Palestinians and how they're being executed by the IOF and US mercenaries while trying to seek aid. Unfortunately, we've been seeing a lot of that lately. An 18-year-old Hani Hamad from Gaza said There's no other choice. I have no money to buy the overpriced goods available in the markets. My only option is to try my luck with aid distributions. Each time is a near-death experience. There is gunfire, tanks, drones, and attacks. What kind of aid distribution is this? We are exhausted, truly exhausted. And I'll give a brief idea of the cost of food in the Gaza Strip at the moment. So if we're talking about a 25 kg bag of flour, you're talking about $558 US. 1 kg of rice, $10. 1 kg of sugar, $22. 1 carton of eggs, $43. Butter, $25. Baby formula, that's 1 kg, $28. Cooking oil, $27. 1 piece of bread, $3. And I don't think it's the fact that food is expensive. I think it's more of the fact that there is no food. There's nothing for people to get, and unfortunately they end up being at those aid distribution centres where they know they're going to be risking their lives, but they still go in the hope of getting some food. Yeah.
And also those are prices that have to be understood, even where food is available to buy, which of course is, we'll say, patchy at best. Those are prices that you have to consider the actual amount of money that a Palestinian person living in Gaza would have available. It's not even remotely comparable to, say, those costs if you consider them for someone with an average wage here in New Zealand. This is in a situation where you are talking about a considerably smaller economic base. And so. Yeah, I would agree. I think they're good metrics for scarcity in this case, but it is best understood that they reflect a lack of food rather than expensiveness of food.
Definitely, and I think as we hear of, people raising money, people raising funds, GoFundMe pages, all the intentions are good and they go into saving and raising money for Gazans, but the thing is, the reality is there's no money getting in. There's no way of anyone, I don't think, to actually send money to someone in Gaza. It's just gotten to the point where it's almost impossible, and also it's not like people are living and working and earning money. If they're getting money, I've heard recently that the notes of the Israeli shekel, they have to be in a certain, in a good, in a good shape or form to even be used in Gaza at the moment. That's the point that they're getting into. So, unfortunately, as you mentioned, so even if you have the money, it's not a case of having the money. There's more that's involved behind the scenes about that. Yeah,
and it's a pattern you see in sieges and other such things throughout history. But I guess the difference here is that you're not talking about a siege in, say, the 1750s or something. We're talking about today. Talking about an era in which the technical capacity to prevent these things from happening is absolutely there. It could be opened up in a day, and it's a political choice not to.
100%, yep, definitely.
So, as you say, starvation, which is being used essentially as a weapon of war here, is widespread. However, that does not mean that the atrocities by force have not stopped. It's not as though it's transitioned from one to the other. It's more that it's both. So, would you be able to speak a little bit to I guess you could say almost the military conditions, or at least the conditions by force on the ground? Yeah,
definitely. So I think as well as those aid distribution centres, I think the Israeli occupation look at it as one of the soldiers. I was reading this on one of my episodes for the Watermelon Report the other day, and he was basically saying it's like a video game. They go on their phones, they push through a button, use AI, and a grenade goes out. Like it's, so as well as we talked about those distribution centres, there has been bombings of schools still. There was the bombing of a famous church in Gaza recently as well. I would say on a daily basis, at least we are losing at least 50 Palestinians, and that's on a daily basis, and that's the bare minimum of the number that I have in my mind. And unfortunately, we still don't know those exact numbers that come out. We actually don't, the numbers and the figures that we do get, no one will ever know the exact numbers and what they exactly are, because we still have people under the rubble. We still have people who are still looking for their family members. I think from memory, 83% of Gaza is now occupied by the Israeli army. And they are looking into turning it into a concentration camp in the Rafah area. So they're just wanting to push everyone into, I think, the 15% of Gaza.
Yeah, that was the next thing I wanted to get to. I think they have a specific name for it, which concentration camps always do. They always have a special name to not call it that. It's not like a humanitarian zone or something like that.
Yeah, something.
Humanitarian city, maybe.
Yeah.
But I believe you're completely correct. It's a fancy name for a concentration camp.
Yeah.
And this plan has... it's raised quite a lot of international alarm, more so than I've seen for other specific plans. Of course, we probably all remember the rather deranged project to turn Gaza into a tech city that was promoted last year, which was just at best fanciful nonsense, at worst actively deranged and a very disgusting thing to try and promote. But I think this case, because it looks a lot more concrete, I believe people have paid slightly more attention to this one, because saying we're going to turn it into a tech city it's very pie in the sky. What they want to do, as heinous as it is, it's not very likely.
Yeah.
This is something that you could materially do relatively easily, and I might be wrong in thinking this, but I would imagine that this is kind of the logical culmination of the use of the movement of population as a weapon of terror that's occurred throughout this conflict, throughout this genocide. In the form of constantly moving people from one city to another, making them go on forced marches of 10 or 20 kilometers just to stay safe, and then immediately turning them and going the other way.
Yeah.
And not to editorialize too much, but there's one thing that reminds me of, it actually reminds me quite a bit of a lot of what happened during the Armenian genocide, which of course, at least in terms of location, is a very close affair to what's happening here. And the extensive use of just continuously marching large populations of people, essentially in the hopes that you break them and a sufficient number of them simply fall dead from exhaustion, that you don't have to deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, I think that's what they're aiming for. And I can read a bit about this. Well, they call it concentration camp or whatever their plan is. But they're basically planning to force over 2 million Palestinians into this tiny camp. And people in Gaza already have they've got a very small place to go as it is, because, as I mentioned, 85% of Gaza is occupied as it is. So it's not like people can freely move around. And these restrictions mean Palestinians in Gaza are living with around just 24 square meters of personal space. And so Israel has, of course, leveled Gaza's infrastructure, leaving people to set up tents amid rising garbage and sewage, which is another thing. Ahmed Shalula from Gaza said, we can't sleep, we can't eat, we can't drink, the smell is killing us. And Nahid Al-Zanan said, "There are snakes here. The weather is hot and rats are everywhere. You constantly look around watching for rats, and at night they pull at you and your clothes while you sleep. Who can bear the life we're living? We're enduring the war, and now we have to deal with the dirt and the rubbish. There's no place to take refuge." So I think it's, as well as they're pushing people into one place, there's also rubbish and not the best health conditions to live under, or even if you build a tent over the rubble, it's still not the best conditions to live on top of. And now that we're about to finish our winter in New Zealand, well, almost halfway through our winter, I would say they are halfway through their summer, and summer in Palestine can get really hot. So unfortunately, as they mentioned, snakes, rats, whatever can come out.
So one thing that's really struck me is I made the comparison just before to an archaic siege or to the Armenian genocide, and I think it is at a point where you could reach to just about anything for comparison. Any terrible, horrific thing that's happened in human history as a result of direct human action is a comparison to this. And I think I reach for these slightly more obscure ones as a way of saying that this is an event that is world historic in its tragedy, but it is also something that you don't have to make a comparison that's going to immediately set someone off and say, "Oh, you can't make that comparison," because there are so many. And what's at stake here is trying to no longer to prevent, but trying to end this world historic tragedy, and to try and figure out what exactly to do on the other side. Which I think is something that a lot of people are uncomfortable with, because it's all well and good to say you're opposed to this, and I think most people in New Zealand are probably on principle opposed, at least to the level of suffering, but it's another thing entirely to say we need to bring this to an end, and we also need to figure out what happens next. And that level, I think there is a certain level of hope that people have become, people have sort of ceased to feel like is possible in this situation, in saying that there is going to be a next. The Palestinian people are not going anywhere. It used to be a phrase, it's actually an apocryphal one, but people used to say that that Adolf Hitler had this quote saying, "Who now remembers the Armenians?" It's another reason why I bring it up. But of course the Armenian people still exist. The genocide did not get rid of them, just as the Holocaust did not get rid of the Jewish people, just as
Bosnia as well.
Just as any number of these events, very, very, very few of them in history have ever successfully gotten rid of an entire people, and none have been successful in doing that in hundreds of years. Because people do want to live, and in a general sense, people fundamentally do want to live and to continue engaging with the cultures into which they are born and to which they want to propagate.
And I think a lot of people, they ask us how us Palestinians keep on going, and how we get up every day, turn up to our jobs, pretend nothing is happening in our background, do our jobs, go home, and then we live on the other side. We live our other life, which is through our phone screens, basically watching our people being slaughtered alive. And I think a lot of it has to do with, as you mentioned, people want to live, people want to survive. But I think with us Palestinians, we've just never lost hope. We love the land. We have a strong faith. I'm saying that as a Muslim, but also I am aware that there are Christians in Gaza too, and we all just have deep faiths that keep us going, basically. And I think that's why a lot of people reverted to Islam from the start of what's been happening in Gaza, because they were like, oh, so what makes those people very, strong and keep going, and despite everything that's happening in their lives, which I think is quite interesting too. But yeah, we will never lose hope, and I think that's what makes us keep going every day. And as you said, through the Holocaust, Bosnia, Armenia, those people have not been erased, and they are still there and exist, and they still fight for their causes. So it is definitely about time for us, as you said, on the other side, to know, or to basically have the collective power to end this genocide at this point. I think at this point we just need it to end. That's all, yeah.
Yeah, and there is also, I think, one of the things that gets brought up by people who are probably arguing in bad faith, or maybe just to kind of nuance themselves into a whole. There is an argument about, well, what could possibly happen next if all of this is true? And I think we can very much acknowledge that it's true, and you'd have to have some very rotten reasoning to try and convince yourself that it's not. What could possibly happen next? And I think in reaching for these other, I hesitate to say historical, because some of them are even within my lifetime, but for reaching these other examples, in every case there is still a next. You do have to figure out exactly what comes next. And whether it's the defacifcation programs that did not go far enough but did happen at the end of the Second World War, whether it's the reconciliation program at the end of apartheid, which is obviously still ongoing in South Africa, these might not be perfect, but they do show that you can do something.
Yeah.
And I think that's a powerful thing to say, that this does not need to end in just opening up another bloodbath. This can end now. And it can end in a way where we look to creating a future where it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you're right. It's not just about what's happening now and in Palestine, because, again, it could be happening to any group of people or any society or any country. It's about what we do, next to make it stop and not happen again. And unfortunately, we can look at it from the outside and there has been a big movement for Palestine since, I would say there has always been support for Palestine, but I would say that since October 7th, the support has grown more. But I've never seen such a big movement for Palestine, and I think that on its own, a worldwide global movement is very much needed so now. And I think global sanctions, strikes, whatever is needed now just to end this genocide. But you're also right about what do we do to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else, really.
Yeah, so that is very much, again, I think it's something that is about holding out hope in spite of what you see in front of you. And I think that could also bring us to talking about, what happens next, where do you go from here. It might be good to move on to the fact that it's not just Gaza that this is happening in. This is also happening in the West Bank. Obviously, there's not an ongoing genocide. However, there is large-scale settler violence. There is an enormous amount of suppression on the part of security forces. So I think we can move a little bit here to the West Bank and just discuss what's happening there, because that's one of the forgotten theatres of this atrocity. Very much has been the West Bank, in my opinion. Yeah, no,
100%. And for someone that comes from the West Bank, I have lived and gone through this. So unfortunately, what's happening in Gaza is beyond words, and there's so much to describe about what's happening in there, but we can say the same thing is happening almost in the West Bank. As you mentioned, settler violence. I think when I think of my days in the West Bank, and for someone that grew up in Hebron, the restrictions are what make life really hard for us in the West Bank. So going from, for example, from Hebron to Ramallah to Bethlehem, you can't just simply pack your car and be like, oh yeah, I'm going on a holiday for the weekend to visit my uncle in Ramallah. My uncle lives in Ramallah. He hasn't been able to see my grandparents who live alone in Hebron for probably the past 2 months, because it's been really hard and restricted for him to go from one area to another. Checkpoints, settler violence, a lot has been happening in the West Bank. I've got some notes here. I know that Israel is creating armed squads of illegal settlers to attack Palestinians. So the extremist Israeli politician Itamar Ben-Gvir has founded a volunteer squadron of over 100 Israeli settlers to attack Palestinians in the West Bank. The move is part of his call for mass violence against Palestinians with the goal of stealing their land. Israeli settlers also live legally on land in the West Bank that has been stolen from Palestinians, as we might know. Mobs of settlers regularly attack Palestinian families to force them out of their homes and steal more land, setting their towns on fire, killing their livestock and assaulting them brutally as well. Israel's top officials openly back and encourage Israeli settler attacks on Palestinian communities. In fact, Israel has armed settlers with over 120,000 guns to use against Palestinians. And with this squad, Israel's government is endorsing settler violence even more officially. And I want to mention as well, about 2 weeks ago, a mob of Israeli settlers brutally killed a 20-year-old Palestinian American, Saifullah Mosalet. Instead of holding Saifullah's killers accountable, Israel is giving these racist attacks more government support than ever. And also, the Israeli forces as well have forcibly displaced more than 40,000 Palestinians in the occupied West Bank since January, and they still can't go home. Israeli forces launched Operation Iron Wall in January, attacking cities and villages throughout the occupied West Bank. For nearly 6 months, soldiers have bulldozed streets, bombed residential buildings, staged mass arrests and forced Palestinians out of their homes at gunpoint. We've seen that happen in Jenin, Tubas, Nablus, Tulkarem, Hebron and Bethlehem. Israeli forces have forced 90% of Palestinians from their homes in Jenin refugee camp, and in Tulkarem, it was 75% of residents are now displaced. So, yeah, a lot has been happening in the West Bank as well, and I think when the media's attention is so much on Gaza, it kind of, and I guess that's the whole plan, is to take the eyes off West Bank, or to make people think that it's only happening in Gaza, or Gaza is all of Palestine, or Palestine is all of Gaza. But no, there's the West Bank. There are cities in there. There are people that live there that try and get up and do their jobs every day or raise their children. And yeah, it's very strict. Yep.
And I think it's worth remembering that when we're talking about what you said at the start about not being able to go from Hebron to Ramallah or from any sort of point A to point B in the West Bank, we're talking about a very small area. If there weren't mountains of checkpoints and soldiers and you have to give your papers here, there, and the next place just to go from A to B, we're talking about maybe 2 hours drive from one end to the other.
Exactly.
It's a very concentrated area that these people have been slowly but surely pushed into by the encroachment of settlements and by successive conflicts going on for many decades now. And the idea that it might take, say, 12 hours to get from one point to another, it's worth thinking in terms of this being similar to, say, well, you can go from Dunedin to Oamaru, but it's going to take you 12 hours or 14 hours because there's a checkpoint every kilometre and a half or something.
Yeah. And I guess not only checkpoints, there's also you're risking your life, basically, because, they could just decide that they need to point a gun at you and shoot you simply because they wanted to, or simply because you might have not had the right documentation on you in your car at that point in time, or maybe you didn't have a good enough reason to go to the next point that you were going into. And I think it's good to mention as well is that not all Palestinians are allowed to go in all parts of Palestine. For example, if someone in Hebron decided to go to Jerusalem, they can't do that without applying for a permit to get them into there. And even having a permit doesn't mean that they will and that they're guaranteed to go and pray at Al-Aqsa Mosque, for example, because they could be stopped at one of those checkpoints and interrogated and maybe even arrested simply,
And that is, the other thing is that this pattern of this very intense kind of security apparatus that isn't necessarily just there to kill, it's also there to harass and to arrest and to just generally make life as miserable as possible, to encourage people to leave. I also imagine that part of the danger would come from the settlements in terms of how dispersed they are throughout the edges, but also quite far into the West Bank. I imagine it would be quite difficult to get from one place to another without skirting along the edge of one settlement or another's territory, and you're risking your life then as well, because not only is there a occupying military force to deal with, you also have these armed civilian bands essentially who are empowered, or at least have the officials in charge looking the other way when they go out and commit, kind of generalized acts of violence. Which again is another thing. Like, there are situations in which you have civilians under arms, and in wartime it's not the most uncommon thing for there to be militias or there to be other kind of informal quasi-military structures. But this is a case of something that you see quite often, which is when you have these kind of armed civilian bodies that have absolutely no oversight and that are allowed to use their arms essentially as they please, as long as they're pointed in a certain direction. That is one area where you see that again and again. You see that in Bosnia, you see that in Armenia, you see that during the Second World War in both the European theatre with the actions of the Waffen-SS and the Wehrmacht across Europe, and also in the you also see that to a certain extent in the Asian theatre as well during the Sino-Japanese War. So this is something that, again, it's not happening in a vacuum. It's not as though there are people in the Israeli government who just don't know what this means. It's very calculated, and it's done in the knowledge of what happens when this situation is allowed to arise.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's all, they get taught exactly what to do and when to do it and how to do it. And, I mean, at the end of the day, they're given the power, they're given the guns and the weapons, and no one is there to stop them, unfortunately. And as you mentioned, going from one area to another in Palestine, even though the majority that live there are Palestinians, there are still, settlers everywhere, and any settler or from any settlement could just jump out, basically jump out to the street on your way, stop your car, and just, maybe try and shoot you or shoot your car. Or, as you said before, very important that they do this to make Palestinians leave, or to basically to ethnic cleanse, I guess. And that has been the underlying plan this whole time, to ethnic cleanse Palestinians.
And it's with these settler militias, it is, I really struggle to see how you could see it as anything but pogromism. And that, I think, it's a term that maybe people aren't as familiar with as terms like genocide or ethnic cleansing, but it's one of those things, again, you see it throughout history, is these kind of generalized open attempts at pushing a certain people on whatever basis out of an area or subjugating them. And it's not necessarily the point that you want to absolutely exterminate all of them, but you want to make life completely intolerable for them, so they essentially get out of the way. And yeah, it's heartbreaking and extraordinarily demoralizing to see these things, but it also isn't a reason to stop fighting, essentially.
No. And I guess this has been happening for years and years now, and if we wanted to give up as Palestinians, we would have given up ages ago. So it definitely gives more of a reason to fight, not only for us Palestinians, but for the whole world to fight with us and for us, because as we mentioned, it could happen to anyone. So, yeah.
So we've got about 20-ish minutes left, and there's two things I want to do. I'd like to move very quickly to talk a little bit about Israel's military actions across the region. So I would also like to give you a bit of a chance to talk about upcoming events as well. So we'll try to get through this reasonably quick so that you have plenty of time to chat about where the movement is at and what's happening down here. So I think we should talk a little bit about Iran first, because the short war between Iran and Israel and also the US has kind of concluded. It obviously might open again, but the kind of active phase is quiet at the moment. Do you want to talk just a little bit about how Israel is kind of drawn in these other conflicts as part of the genocide?
Yeah, so I think with what has happened recently with Iran and Israel, for me, to be honest, I see it as a distraction. I see it as, oh yeah, we've got the whole world's eyes on Gaza, let's do something else so we can draw those eyes away from Gaza. That 12-day war that was an armed conflict in the Middle East fought between Iran and Israel, and that was during June 2025. Basically, it began when Israel launched surprise attacks on key military and nuclear facilities in Iran on 13th of June. And that was in the midst of the Gaza war and its broader regional spillover. And in the opening hours of that war, Israeli air and ground forces assassinated some of Iran's prominent military leaders, nuclear scientists, and politicians, which I think was kind of, I would say, the main event. And then towards the end, Iran retaliated with waves of missile and drone strikes against Israeli cities and military sites. Over 550 ballistic missiles and more than 1,000 explosive drones were launched by Iran during that war. And the Iran-allied Houthis in Yemen also fired several missiles at Israel in an adjunct of the Red Sea crisis. And of course, the United States, which defended Israel against Iranian missiles and drones, took offensive action on the 9th day of the war by bombing 3 Iranian nuclear sites. And then, of course, they decided that there's a ceasefire, and it ended there, and still no ceasefire in Gaza.
Yeah, and I think it is worth noting that it is. I agree that to a certain extent it was just to take the heat off, to say, oh, we're going to bring this other thing in because we have the military capacity to do it, and it kind of draws the world's eyes away for a bit. I think it's worth remembering that the cost of that was, I think it was about 1,000 Iranian citizens were killed, and that included not just these kind of high-ranking both military and also civilian figures, as you say, politicians and scientists, but also a large number of people who would just happen to be living in Tehran or other major cities as well. And I think it does speak to a certain extent to the kind of war that Israel is prosecuting again, principally against the Palestinians, that killing hundreds of people in a country that is obviously in certain respects involved in the war, but is very much a different theatre of both military confrontation and also a different theatre of geopolitics, and just kind of using the deaths of civilians elsewhere and the fact that you are the one killing them to make your killing of people in your own backyard sound okay.
Yep.
And I feel as though there is that, and to a certain extent for a couple of weeks it worked.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think, obviously, I spoke about politicians and nuclear scientists, but definitely a lot of, unfortunately, just like what's happening in Gaza, most people at the end of the day are civilians. They just happen to be in that particular side of the world, living their lives, not necessarily knowing about anything or being associated with any group of people, yet they still get attacked. And as you said, and it just makes them sound like what's happening in Gaza is okay. And then they do it in Iran, they do it in Syria, they do it in Lebanon. And unfortunately, a lot of civilians' lives get lost as a price of all of that. And at the end of the day, they were able to agree on a ceasefire as if nothing has happened. And it's now gotten into its quiet stage, I guess. And who knows what's going to happen tomorrow.
And just before we get on to the events happening soon, I would like to talk just a tiny bit about Syria as well. It's a situation in which you actually have a conflict that has claimed a comparable number of lives to what's happening in Gaza. And Israel's actions, to my reading, is naked opportunism. It's not only is there a way to, once again, just kind of create a distraction conflict to take the world's eyes, there's also just a kind of naked power grab. In southern Syria, there's an attempt to try and manipulate the ongoing internal political conditions in Syria to see if there's some kind of military or political advantage that can be taken of it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, as you mentioned, it's to take advantage and opportunity of what's going on in the, I'd say, weaker countries. We all know, we've seen Syria going through a lot of different internal problems, and they just seem to like to take advantage of that. And obviously they're not, at the end of the day, they're not just after Palestine. We should all know that. They're not just after Palestine. They want the entire Middle East. They don't just want to Palestine. And unfortunately, some government leaders are more into that than others, and they're willing to, I would say, shake hands with Israel on the price of the killing of its own people. The Syrian president, just briefly, Ahmed al-Shara, he had made several announcements on national television, and he basically said that the internal unrest between Sunni Bedouins and the Druze minority, resulting in the deaths of around 360 people in the southern province of Suwayda, had ended. He also confirmed government forces were no longer deployed in the area. He also underscored his commitment to protect the rights and freedoms of the Druze community and reaffirmed their place in the Syrian society. But the main part of his speech was directed at Syria's neighbor, Israel, and how Israel launched attacks on Syrian government buildings in Damascus and Syrian troops in the Suwayda region, resulting in the deaths of 20 people. So Israel was only exploiting the unrest by targeting civilian infrastructure again and seeking to derail peace and reconstruction efforts in the country. But Ashar said, "We, the people of Syria, know very well who is trying to drag us into war and who is working to divide us. We will not give them the opportunity to entangle our people in a war that serves only to fragment our homeland and sow destruction."
So it's The way in which I think this, I think you can look at it in terms of it's one conflict, I think, and there is a regional war which is ongoing and which the theatres kind of shift over time depending on where the emphasis of fighting is. Obviously, earlier in the conflict, there was very intense fighting in southern Lebanon, and again, just the wanton targeting of civilian infrastructure and civilian targets by Israel in that conflict. But it has also involved the Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen. It has involved now Syria. It's involved Iran. And it could well spill further. And you also have the ongoing genocide in Gaza and the intense repression in the West Bank. And I think you can look at it as a bit of a domestic and external theatre, that the two are interrelated to one another, but they're not necessarily one and the same thing.
No.
Even if they are all at a fundamental level, part of the same kind of imperial project.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I think that's just something that's always worth remembering, is these are interrelated, but the core of this is an attempt to exterminate the people of Gaza.
Yeah, 100%.
So we've got about 10 minutes left. Listeners of the show who quite enjoy when I do a bit of a review at the end might be disappointed to know that I've kind of opened up this space just for time reasons to talk a little bit about the local movement and what's happening. But I think personally it's important to let people have as much information as they can, and to be really encouraged to come along to events in solidarity with Palestine. So I understand there is a demonstration coming up on Saturday. How about we start with that?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Thank you for giving me the space to promote what's going on in Dunedin as well. So Saturday, 26th of July, we do have a rally coming up, as usual, meeting up at the Museum Reserve at 1 p.m, and then marching to the Octagon. We usually hope to be at the Octagon by 2 p.m. and have some speeches there. This particular Saturday, we're lucky enough to have Chloe from the Green Party. She happens to be down on Friday for something, and she is going to be speaking at the museum, and I'm very delighted to announce that she will be speaking, and I'm sure she'll be talking about the sanctions bill and how important that is, and I'm sure she'll have her fair bit to say about the genocide and what's been going on in Palestine. So we'll have that on Saturday, and on Sunday the 27th there's an event, it's called Voices for Palestine, that will be at Eric's at 6 p.m. on Sunday. Tickets are online, but also if you can't be there, or if you're busy on the night, you can donate, and all donations will go towards UNRWA. I think they've raised about $2,000 so far, and that's not including the event itself. So they were hoping to raise $5,000, but now they've lifted it up to $7,000. The Rosanna fundraiser will be there as well. That's run by my mum. So there'll be the Rosanna stall there that will also be at the rally as well. And I guess just the general housekeeping, if you want to hear about our upcoming events or anything we do for Palestine in Dunedin, you can follow us on Dunedin Palestine on Instagram, or Dunedin for Justice in Palestine on Facebook. There's also a local mailing list as well, which we can add people's emails to if they were interested. You can just private message us on those channels. That's pretty much what's coming up for next. We did go quiet for a little bit, but you can only imagine how much the emotional side of this and mental side has taken. So
yeah. So as I understand it, the rallies have are monthly at the moment.
Sort of, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So we haven't. We did have one in June, but we haven't. But yeah, this will be our first kind of event in July. Yep.
Yep. I only bring that up for any listeners who might really want to make it this Saturday and just can't for whatever reason. There will be future events.
Oh, definitely.
And yeah, absolutely. If you want to run through just again before we close out, and I kind of give a little bit of an ending spiel, just the places that people can go to find out about what's happening and if they want to get involved,
Yeah, definitely. So again, Dunedin Palestine on Instagram and Dunedin for Justice in Palestine on Facebook. They can also follow PSNA and other pages around the country that do things on more of a national level. So PSNA, and there's, which is Palestine Solidarity Network, Aotearoa. And yeah, there are a lot of amazing people around the country that do amazing mahi for Palestine. So if you are in a particular city and you're unsure about the actions or where to go, please do reach out, and I'm sure we can guide them towards the right direction.
Thank you. So I've got a few closing thoughts, and then I'll round out the show. The thing I really wanted to just say is that I think a lot of people who are very sympathetic but are very aware that we live in New Zealand. It's not a country that is hugely tied into the conflict. The economic ties to Israel are not enormous, although they do exist. And there is, I guess, some people kind of wonder what exactly can New Zealand, even if the whole country was united, really do about it. And to that, because this is something I've encountered a little bit recently, talking to some people that I know who are pretty politically disengaged, from world politics. They are sympathetic, but they kind of don't know what exactly New Zealand could possibly do about it from this part of the world. And to that, I really think it is worth, as much as it's become a bit of a cliche, it is worth remembering the anti-apartheid generation, because New Zealand, again, is not by any means an economic powerhouse, at least not on the world stage. And it's, on the other side of the world from conflicts that New Zealanders have taken a great deal of interest in, even ones that, New Zealand itself hasn't been involved in. And when it came to the anti-apartheid struggle, it really was a matter of saying that here are all of the things we could possibly do, and we're going to piece by piece make sure every single one of them gets done. And the other thing is that it might be really difficult to see the kind of on-the-ground impact that fundraising can have, but it is important, I think, to know that the money that gets fundraised by organisations like Dunedin for Justice in Palestine and like PSNA, that money is going to organisations that are well-vetted and can have an impact on the ground. So that money isn't just going nowhere. Yeah. And yeah, I think that people can kind of underestimate the impact that New Zealand can have. And I just think that there are a lot of things that might seem kind of pie in the sky in terms of like, how much will Israel really care? But Israel expends an enormous amount on trying to maintain its image across the world and trying to maintain friendly relations with Western governments and governments in other parts of the world. And that is meaningful to make a crack in that armor. It is meaningful to ensure that Israel knows that they don't have a friend in New Zealand. It's not some sort of uncomplicated thing, and it is meaningful, whichever country you're from, to make that stand.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just a little bit of a spiel on my part to kind of round things out. That turning out does actually mean something, even if it seems hopeless, and I very much understand when it does. But even in situations where it seems helpless, in my opinion, it's always better to err on the side of fight, even if it's just to spite the bastards. I shouldn't say that on air, but we're going to kind of round out the show. There is an upcoming event that the Otago Socialist Society will be hosting. It's a documentary screening, and if you just keep an eye on our Instagram page or email us, You can get the information when we've finalised all the details on that. Once again, huge thank you to Rinad for coming on. I wouldn't say it's a delight to have you on, given the circumstances and the context, but it's always great to get that update and to remind all the listeners that Dunedin hasn't stopped fighting.
No, we haven't. Thank you so much, and I can't believe it's been an hour of us discussing only a few points. So, and thank you again for having me. And again, the least we could be doing is speak up about what's happening.
All right. Once again, to the listeners, you are listening to Left From Nowhere on Otago Access Radio 105.4 FM, 1575 AM. Wherever you're listening to this, whether it is live or whether it is via the internet later on, do just think of giving Otago Access Radio a follow, whatever social media you use, and keeping an eye out for what happens next with this show and also other great shows on this network. I think I'll end it at that. Once again, thank you, Rinad, and we'll kind of leave things there.
The White Sox stronger by the year. The White Sox stronger by the year. The White Sox stronger by the year. The answer's never clear. You walk upon the sphere. Keep walking.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.